the illusion of forever, a truth we often ignore. Love, so many of us believe it to be unshakable, eternal, something that can withstand time itself. We cherish the warmth of shared laughter, the comfort of a familiar presence, and the quiet certainty that love, once given, will always remain. But have you ever woken up one day and felt the absence of something that was once so present? Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who once adored you, only to find a distant stranger gazing back? Like the morning mist upon the mountains, love feels endless until it isn't. The more we try to hold onto it, the more it slips through our fingers, revealing a truth we often refuse to accept: impermanence. In Buddhism, Anicca, or the nature of impermanence, teaches us that nothing, no feeling, no relationship, no attachment remains unchanged. And yet, we resist. We hold on. We plead. But what if we could learn to release love as naturally as it comes? What if, instead of fearing its departure, we could embrace its ever-changing nature? Today, we will explore two undeniable signs that love is fading. But this is not just about recognizing loss, it is about understanding it, about finding peace in its wake. Through Buddhist wisdom, we will uncover the path to acceptance, to inner stillness, and ultimately, to a love that does not bind but liberates. If this is your first time here, welcome to Buddhism Light, a space where we explore life's deepest truths through the lens of Zen and Buddhist philosophy. If you find value in these teachings, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community of seekers. Now, let's dive deep into the unseen shifts that mark the quiet end of love and what they can teach us about ourselves. Sign 1. Withdrawing their presence. When someone loses their love for you, the first thing they do is withdraw their presence, and this withdrawal is rarely immediate or obvious. It starts with small things, things you might not even notice at first: a slight delay in their responses, a conversation that feels just a little more distant, laughter that no longer carries the same warmth. Their body may still be in the same space as yours, but something is missing. The way they used to look at you with interest, the way their energy filled the room, the way they once made you feel seen and understood, it all begins to shift. You ask yourself if you're imagining it, if maybe they're just tired or distracted, if life has simply gotten in the way, but deep down, you feel the change before you can fully comprehend it. They start replying to your messages with shorter responses, not because they are busy but because they no longer feel the pull to engage. The connection that once made your conversations flow so effortlessly has begun to dry up, like a river that once ran strong but is now reduced to a trickle. You catch them hesitating before answering, as if weighing their words, not out of care but out of a quiet indifference. You notice how their laughter has changed. It still exists, but it feels distant, as though you're no longer the one who brings them joy. Their physical presence remains, but their mind seems elsewhere, occupied by thoughts and emotions you are no longer a part of. They no longer seek you out, no longer initiate moments of closeness. The habits you once shared, the rituals that made your connection unique, start to fade. The good night texts, the morning greetings, the small gestures of affection that once felt so natural now feel like a chore to them, something they remember out of obligation rather than desire. When you sit together, the silence stretches longer, heavier, no longer the comfortable kind but the kind filled with everything left unsaid. There is no fight, no grand argument, no final breaking point, just an absence that grows, a distance that takes root in the spaces where love once thrived. And still, you tell yourself it's temporary, that things will return to how they were, but they don't. They become more engrossed in their phone when you're together, more eager to spend time apart, more disengaged from the moments that used to bring you both closer. You start to feel like an observer in their life rather than a participant. They still show up, still go through the motions, but it's different now. The presence that once felt like home is now a shadow of what it used to be. And the hardest part is realizing that they may not even be doing it consciously. Love does not always leave with a dramatic exit. Sometimes, it simply fades, slipping away like the tide pulling back from the shore. You try to reach for it, but it recedes further. You wonder if they are testing you, if they want you to chase after them, to fight for their attention, but the truth is, love that is slipping away cannot be pulled back by force. Clinging to someone who is already letting go only makes them withdraw faster. The more you try to hold on, the more they retreat. They may not be cruel or harsh, in fact, they may still be kind, still say the right things when prompted, still maintain the surface level connection, but it's no longer the same. The warmth is gone, the spark has dimmed, and what remains is politeness rather than passion, duty rather than desire. And deep inside, you know. You feel it in the way they no longer ask about your day with the same curiosity, in the way they no longer lean into you when you speak, in the way their mind drifts even when their body stays. Love, when it begins to withdraw, does so in a way that is almost imperceptible at first, but once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. It is in the small hesitations, in the pauses between words, in the way they have slowly stopped reaching for you in the way they once did. And so you are left with a choice not to fight for what is already slipping away, not to beg for a love that. A Zen master once took his student to a quiet garden where the afternoon sun filtered softly through the leaves, casting a golden glow over the earth. In the center stood an old tree, its thick branches stretching outward, offering shade and shelter to the creatures that sought its refuge. The master motioned for the student to sit beside him on a stone bench. For a while, they simply watched the life unfolding around them. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs filling the air with a melody both light and fleeting. The master pointed to a small bird perched on one of the lower branches. It chirped contentedly, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath, completely at ease in the presence of the tree. "Look at how peacefully it rests," the master said. "The tree provides comfort, shade, and a place to belong. The bird does not think about leaving, for it feels safe." The student nodded, watching the little bird closely. For a moment, it seemed as though it belonged there, as though it had always belonged there. But then, with no warning, the master lifted his hand and made a small movement, just a slight wave of his fingers. The disturbance was minimal, barely enough to stir the leaves, but the bird noticed. It tensed for just a second, its tiny claws gripping the bark. Then, without hesitation, it spread its wings and flew away. The student looked up at his teacher, confused. "Why did it leave? You barely moved." The master smiled, his eyes full of knowing. "This is how love works," he said. "As long as it feels at home, it stays, sings, and flourishes. But when the first whispers of discomfort arise, it begins to sense that change is near. And then, before you realize it, it is gone." The student frowned, his mind grappling with the weight of the lesson. But the tree did nothing wrong. It did not push the bird away. It simply existed. The master chuckled softly. "Exactly. Love is not about fault or blame. It is not always about something we have done or failed to do. It is about movement, about energy, about the flow of life. Love, like the bird, will stay when it feels right. And when it begins to wane, it will withdraw, first subtly, then entirely." The student lowered his gaze, reflecting on the truth of the master's words. "So what should we do when love starts to fade? Should we try to keep it here? Should we change to make it stay?" The master shook his head. "Would you chase the bird, trying to pull it back to the branch? Would you plead with it to stay, even as its wings long for the sky?" The student sighed. "No, that would be foolish. The bird would only be frightened and flee even faster." The master nodded. "And so it is with love. When someone begins to withdraw, they are already shifting away, already moving toward another path. Clinging to them will not restore the warmth that once was. It will only make their departure more painful." The student remained silent, his heart heavy with the understanding that sometimes, no matter how much we wish to hold on to something, it is not meant to stay. He watched the empty branch where the bird had once sat, feeling an ache he could not quite describe. The master, sensing his sorrow, spoke gently. "The tree does not cry for the bird. It does not shrink in despair. It simply continues to stand, to grow, to offer its shade to the next traveler who seeks rest. Love is like this. It comes, it nurtures, and sometimes, It goes. But its presence, no matter how brief, was real. And that is enough. The student exhaled deeply, as though releasing something he had been holding onto for too long. He looked up at the sky, where the bird had disappeared into the vastness beyond the trees. And for the first time, he understood not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things are simply meant to fly. In Buddhist philosophy, one of the greatest causes of suffering is attachment. We suffer not because things change but because we refuse to accept that they do. Love, like all things, is impermanent. It flows in and out of our lives like water, yet we cling to it as though it should be as solid as stone. But even stone erodes over time. When love begins to fade, when someone starts withdrawing from us, our first instinct is to resist. We try to pull them back, to reignite what is slipping away, to grasp at something that is no longer within our reach. But this only deepens our suffering. The more we try to hold on to something that is naturally changing, the more we create pain for ourselves. We tell ourselves that if we just try harder, if we just do more, say the right words, give more love, things will return to how they were. But this is an illusion. Love is not something we can control. It is not a possession we can claim. It is a force that moves freely, and the moment we try to confine it, we'll lose it. The Buddha taught that everything is in a state of constant flux. The self we were yesterday is not the self we are today. The love that once burned brightly may now be dimming, and no amount of willpower can reverse its natural course. This is not a failure. This is not punishment. This is simply the way of things. The more we understand impermanence, the less we suffer. But understanding alone is not enough. We must also practice non-attachment. This does not mean we stop loving, nor does it mean we become indifferent. It means we love with openness, without expectation, without the desperate need for permanence. It means we cherish what we have while it is here and release it when it is time to let go. When someone withdraws from you, when their love begins to fade, do not chase them. Do not beg them to stay. Do not try to make them feel something they no longer do. Chasing after love only prolongs the inevitable. It keeps you trapped in an illusion, unable to move forward. Instead, turn inward. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to? Am I clinging to a version of this person that no longer exists? Am I refusing to see what is right in front of me? Acceptance is the first step to peace. To accept is not to be passive. It is not to give up. It is an act of surrender to reality, a choice to let go of what no longer serves you. It is recognizing that love does not belong to you. It never did. Love is a guest, arriving when the time is right and leaving when its time has passed. When you hold on to a love as though it is something to be owned, you set yourself up for suffering. But when you see love for what it is, an experience, a moment, a presence that flows in and out of your life, you find peace. This does not mean the pain disappears. It does not mean you will not feel the ache of loss. But it does mean you will no longer resist it. And in that lack of resistance, suffering begins to dissolve. Imagine standing in a river, trying to stop the current with your hands. The more you try to hold the water, the more it slips through your fingers. But if you step back, if you allow the river to flow as it naturally does, you realize that the water is not lost to you. It moves on, but so do you. Love is the same. It does not belong to you, nor can you force it to stay. When someone withdraws, when their love changes, step back and let it flow. Clinging will not keep it near. Love that is forced to remain is no longer love, it is obligation. And true love cannot exist in the realm of force or control. It only exists in freedom. The path of least suffering is the path of acceptance. The heartache of lost love is real, but it does not have to define you. When love fades, bow to it. Thank it for its time. Let it leave with grace. For just as the seasons change, just as the tide rises and falls, love will come again in another form, in another time, in another way. But only if you make space for it by letting go of what no longer is. Sign 2, they become someone else. When someone loses love for you, they do not just withdraw their presence, they begin to change in ways that make them unrecognizable. The person who once laughed with you, who once found joy in your company, who once saw the world through the same lens as you, slowly becomes a stranger. Their interests shift, their reactions no longer align with yours, and the warmth that once lived in their voice begins to fade. At first, it might seem like they are simply growing, evolving, discovering new things, but soon, you realize that this transformation is not one that includes you. The things that used to bring you closer now create distance. The inside jokes that once made you both burst into laughter now receive nothing more than a faint smile or even a look of disinterest. The plans that were once met with excitement are now met with indifference or excuses. You begin to feel like an outsider in their life, watching as they slowly detach from the person they once were with you. They start finding joy in things they never cared for before, and their attention shifts toward new people, new places, new experiences that no longer have anything to do with you. Their words become different, their priorities change, and what once felt like a shared journey now feels like two parallel roads drifting apart. The conversations that once flowed effortlessly now feel forced. You find yourself asking questions, trying to keep the connection alive, but their answers are short, lacking enthusiasm, as if they are answering out of politeness rather than genuine interest. The things that once sparked passion in their voice are now spoken about with monotony, as if they are merely going through the motions. The person who used to be so engaged in your world now seems detached, uninterested, as if they are only half listening. You tell yourself that maybe they are just going through something, that maybe it is just a phase, but deep down, you know. They are changing, and you are no longer part of that change. Their affection no longer feels the same, their touch lacks the depth it once had, and their eyes, which once held so much warmth, now seem distant, as if looking past you rather than at you. The rhythm of their heartbeat, which once felt in sync with yours, now feels like it beats to a different tune, one you can no longer hear. They no longer turn to you when something exciting happens. The stories they once couldn't wait to share with you are now shared with others first, or worse, never shared with you at all. The things you once did together now become things they prefer to do alone or with new people. You feel the gap widening, and no matter how much you try to reach across, it only stretches further. You try to remind them of who they once were, of what you once had, but it is like trying to grasp at smoke. The more you try to hold on, the more they slip away. You watch as they become someone else, someone who no longer finds comfort in you, someone who no longer looks at you the way they used to. And the hardest part is realizing that they are not doing it to hurt you. They are not making a conscious choice to change in a way that leaves you behind. It is simply happening. Just as the seasons change without asking permission, just as the river carves new paths through the land, people transform in ways that are beyond anyone's control. Love does not always end in betrayal or conflict. Sometimes, it simply fades as two people grow in different directions. Sometimes, the person you knew disappears, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Holding on to them, trying to force them to remain the same, will only bring you pain. You cannot ask a tree to keep its leaves forever, nor can you ask a person to stay unchanged when life is constantly moving them forward. You may grieve the loss of who they were, and that grief is real, but the truth is, they are not yours to keep. They were never yours to keep. They were only ever passing through, just as you are passing through their life as well. The moment you accept that people are, seeing them for who they are now, and in that acceptance, you will find peace, even in loss. A young disciple approached his master, troubled. "Master, why do people change? Why do those we love become different?" The master, sensing his sorrow, led him to a still pond. "Look at your reflection," he said. The student peered into the water. "I see myself." The master tossed a stone into the pond, sending ripples across the surface. The reflection wavered and changed. "Now what do you see?" the master asked. The student frowned. "My reflection is distorted." The master nodded. Just as water never stays still, neither do people. Their thoughts shift, Their hearts move, and they evolve. Expecting them to remain the same brings suffering. The student watched as the ripples settled and his image returned. But if people always change, how can we trust love? He asked. The master sat on a stone and replied, love is like the reflection in the water, real in its moment, but never still. If you cling to how someone was, you will suffer. You must love them for their essence, not just the version you once knew. The student reflected on his own relationships, realizing he had held on to past versions of people, resisting the natural flow of life. So what should we do when someone we love changes? He asked. The master dropped another stone into the water. We let the ripples come and go. We honor what was, accept what is, and embrace what will be. To love is not to keep someone fixed in time, but to allow them to grow freely. The student breathed deeply, releasing his need to hold on to the past. He looked at the pond once more, understanding that love is not about possession but about presence. And as they walked away, he felt not loss, but peace. The self is not fixed but a continuous flow of experiences, emotions, and change. Like a river that never flows the same way twice, people evolve, shaped by time and circumstances. When love fades, it is not a conscious decision but a natural shift. The person who once loved you no longer exists in the same form, just as you are not the same as before. Clinging to the past only creates suffering. Trying to bring someone back to who they were is like holding on to falling leaves. Nature moves forward, and so must you. Loss is not just about them leaving but about the version of yourself that existed with them. When love changes, do not resist. Let go with grace, just as trees release their leaves, trusting new growth will come. You cannot control emotions that are no longer there, nor force someone to stay where they no longer belong. The self is ever changing. Pain fades, emptiness is temporary, and life continues. Flow with it, embrace change, and find peace not in holding on but in letting go. Letting go without bitterness requires a shift in perspective. Love is not something to own but something to experience. It is not a guarantee, nor a possession, but a fleeting connection that arises and dissolves naturally. The pain of loss often comes not from the separation itself but from resisting its inevitability. Holding on to something that has already gone only deepens suffering. Instead of mourning its end, be grateful it existed. Every moment of love, no matter how brief, was real, and shaped you in some way. Honor what was, rather than clinging to what is no longer. If love has left, do not chase it. Begging for it to stay denies reality and drains your energy. Forced love is not love, it is obligation, guilt, or convenience. True love cannot be confined, and grasping for it only prolongs the pain. Just as a bird does not remain in a tree that no longer provides shelter, love moves where it is meant to be. Release it and trust in what is to come. Love without attachment means understanding that love does not require possession. You can still love someone even after they leave. It does not need proximity or reciprocation to exist. Love is expansive, and true love wishes happiness for the other, even from afar. The need to claim and control is what causes suffering. Let go of what is beyond you. Many believe losing love means losing a part of themselves, but this is an illusion. You are not incomplete without another's affection. Love does not fill a void within you, it reflects what was already there. You existed before them and will continue to exist after them. You are not defined by who loves you but by your own presence and ability to live fully. Letting go does not mean erasing memories or pretending love never existed. It means accepting change, recognizing that people grow in different directions, and embracing impermanence. Clinging to what has already left only creates more suffering. Letting go is an act of love not just for them, but for yourself. It is choosing peace over pain, freedom over attachment, and presence over longing. The heart may ache, but in its openness, it also heals. Release, breathe, trust. Love will come again, in another time, in another way, when you are ready to receive it. Love was never yours to own, only to experience. A man once stood by a great river, watching the water move effortlessly toward an unknown destination. He had loved. He had lost. He had spent years trying to understand why love had left him, why the warmth that once surrounded him had turned cold. But as he watched the river flow, he realized something profound. Love had not vanished, it had only changed. The river did not mourn the water that passed through it. It simply allowed it to move as it was meant to, shaping the land, nourishing life, and continuing on. We often mistake love for possession, as though we are entitled to hold onto it forever. But love is not something to be kept, it is something to be lived, experienced, and, when the time comes, released. It is a guest, visiting us when the moment is right, teaching us, shaping us, then moving forward, just as we must. The greatest suffering comes not from losing love, but from trying to keep it from changing. If someone is withdrawing, if their presence fades, if their heart is no longer beside yours, do not chase. Do not beg. Instead, bow. Honor what was. Accept what is. Love, at its highest form, is freedom, not attachment. If this message has resonated with you, if you seek wisdom on navigating love, loss, and the impermanence of all things, then I invite you to join our Buddhism Light community. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new insight into mindfulness and inner peace. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever struggled with letting go? What lessons has love taught you? Let's continue this journey together. And remember, love is never truly lost. It only changes. The question is, are you willing to change with it?